He woke to silence after the fire. The Apaches were gone, but their horses remained at his barn. The smell of smoke still clung to everything when Marcus Steele opened his eyes. Through the cracked window of his cabin, the Wyoming plains stretched endlessly under a gray dawn sky that promised nothing but trouble. The fire had burned itself out sometime during the night, leaving behind the acrid scent of charred wood and something else he could not quite identify. Something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. Marcus rolled out of his bedroll, his 45-year-old joints protesting after a night spent on the hard floor. His cabin was intact, untouched by the flames that had swept across the southern pasture. But the silence that greeted him was absolute, unnatural, the kind of quiet that came before avalanches or Apache raids. He reached for his Colt, checking the cylinder out of habit ingrained by 20 years of frontier living. 6 bullets, clean barrel, hammer resting on an empty chamber. The familiar weight of the weapon provided little comfort as he moved toward the door. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. 7 horses stood in his barn, their coats painted with symbols he recognized from his cavalry days. Apache war ponies, their saddles and bridles decorated with feathers and beadwork that spoke of riders who had vanished like morning mist. But where were the Apache who had ridden them? Marcus stepped onto his porch, boots echoing hollow on weathered wood. The fire had carved a perfect circle around his property, burning everything for miles in every direction except the small patch of land where his cabin, barn, and well stood, untouched. It was as if something had drawn a protective barrier around his homestead, while the rest of the world burned. "Hello?" he called out, his voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. No answer came. Even the wind had died, leaving the scorched landscape frozen in a tableau of destruction that hurt to witness. Marcus had seen battlefield aftermath, had walked through the smoking ruins of destroyed settlements, but this felt different, deliberate, purposeful. He walked toward the barn, each step revealing new impossibilities. The Apache horses were magnificent animals, their coats unmarked by smoke despite the hellish inferno that had raged through the night. They watched him approach with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets, but they showed no fear or aggression. The largest horse, a painted stallion with eagle feathers woven into its mane, stepped forward and nudged Marcus with its nose. Hanging from the saddle horn was a leather pouch marked with symbols that made his eyes water to look at directly. Inside the pouch, Marcus found a message written in careful English on birch bark. The fire was not natural. The coalmen have awakened the flame walker. Follow the horses. Trust the silence. The Apache wait where the earth bleeds fire. Marcus read the message 3 times, each reading making less sense than the last. The coalmen, that would be the mining operation that had been blasting in the hills for the past month. He had heard the explosions echoing across the plains, had seen the black smoke rising from their excavations. But awakened what? The painted stallion snorted and pawed the ground, as if urging him to hurry. The other horses had arranged themselves in a rough formation, clearly expecting to be followed. Marcus had served with Apache scouts during his army days, and had learned to respect their uncanny ability to navigate terrain and read signs invisible to white men. If these horses belonged to Apache, and the Apache had left them here deliberately, then there was a reason. Marcus saddled his own horse, a sturdy mare named Dusty, who had carried him through countless miles of frontier hardship. As he worked, he studied the burn patterns more carefully. The fire had not spread randomly. It had moved in deliberate lines, creating geometric shapes that reminded him of the ritual circles he had sometimes seen at abandoned Apache ceremonial sites. But where were the people who had ridden these horses? The answer came as he mounted Dusty and prepared to follow the Apache ponies. A voice spoke from directly behind him, clear as a church bell despite the fact that no one was there. "They walk between worlds now, Marcus Steele. The price of binding the Flamewalker was steep. Follow their horses, learn their purpose, or watch your territory burn until nothing lives." Marcus spun in his saddle, hand moving instinctively to his weapon. The voice had been distinctly feminine, carrying the accent of someone who had learned English as a second language. But the barnyard remained empty except for the horses and the lingering smell of smoke. "Who are you?" he called out. "I am Morning Star, daughter of chiefs, keeper of the old knowledge. My body burns with the ritual fire, but my spirit remains to guide you. Time grows short. Marcus Steele. The coal men dig deeper, with each passing hour. The painted stallion began moving toward the hills, and the other horses fell into formation behind it. Marcus had no choice but to follow, his rational mind warring with the evidence of his senses. Voices without bodies, horses without riders, fires that burned in perfect patterns. Everything about this situation violated the natural order he understood. But the frontier had taught him that survival often required accepting impossible truths. They rode through the scorched landscape for hours, the Apache horses maintaining a steady pace that covered ground efficiently without exhausting the animals. The burn patterns became more complex as they traveled, forming spirals and interconnected circles that seemed to tell a story in a language Marcus could not read. The silence remained absolute. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, no small animals rustled through the charred grass. It was as if the fire had burned away not just vegetation, but life itself. Only the horses seemed unaffected, their hooves raising small clouds of ash that settled like black snow. "Tell me about the flame walker," Marcus said to the empty air, feeling foolish but desperate for answers. Morningstar's voice came from his left this time, still clear and immediate despite its impossible source. In the old stories, it is the hunger that devours light itself. Coal and oil feed its body, but fear and despair nourish its spirit. The white men's machines have given it strength it never possessed in the ancient times. Marcus thought about the mining operation, the constant blasting and excavation that had been going on for weeks. How did they awaken it? They broke through into the deep chambers where the first people sealed it long ago. Fire spirits require different bindings than shadow creatures or earth demons. We knew this day would come, but we hoped for more time to prepare. The horses crested a ridge, and Marcus saw their destination spread out below. The coal mining operation was a sprawling complex of wooden buildings, steam-powered equipment, and excavation sites that scarred the hillside like open wounds. But something was wrong with the scene. Everything was too still. No smoke rose from the chimneys. No workers moved between the buildings. No sounds of industrial activity echoed across the valley. The mining camp looked abandoned, but Marcus could see no signs of evacuation or emergency. "Where is everyone?" he asked. "Gone," Morningstar replied simply. "The flame walker feeds on those who disturb its rest. The coal men were the first to be consumed, but they will not be the last. Already it grows stronger, prepares to spread across the territory like wildfire made flesh." Marcus urged Dusty down the slope, following the Apache horses toward the silent camp. As they drew closer, he began to notice details that made his stomach clench with dread. Scorch marks on buildings that had not been touched by any external fire. Equipment melted and twisted in ways that suggested impossibly intense heat applied from within. And everywhere, the lingering smell of sulfur and burnt metal. The painted stallion led them directly to the largest excavation site, where mining equipment sat abandoned around a hole that descended far deeper into the earth than any surface operation should require. Steam rose from the depths, carrying with it the stench of brimstone and something else, the sweet, sickening smell of burned human flesh. "The binding ritual must be performed here," Morningstar said, her voice now coming from multiple directions at once. "But it requires a living participant, someone who can speak the words and place the barriers while walking in the world of flesh." Marcus dismounted near the edge of the excavation, fighting the urge to retreat from the malevolent heat that radiated from the depths. "What happened to the Apache who were performing the ritual? We gave our physical forms to power the initial binding. Our spirits remain to guide and protect, but we cannot touch the material world. You must be our hands, Marcus Steele. You must complete what we began." The implications of her words hit him like a physical blow. The Apache had sacrificed their lives to contain the flame walker, burning themselves in ritual fire to power a binding that would protect the territory. Their horses remained because the animals had not been part of the ceremony, but the people themselves were gone, existing now only as guiding spirits. "I don't know your ceremonies," Marcus protested. "I'm not Apache. How can I perform rituals I don't understand?" "Understanding is not required. Only courage and trust. We will speak the words through you, guide your actions with our knowledge, but your body must walk where ours cannot. Your hands must place the barriers we cannot touch. Marcus studied the excavation site, noting the placement of what looked like ceremonial objects around the perimeter. Stone circles, bundles of burning sage, and painted symbols that seemed to shift and move when viewed directly. The Apache had begun their work before being consumed by the binding ritual. What do I need to do? Descend into the earth. Find the chamber where the flame walker rests. Place the final barrier stones while speaking the words we will give you. But beware. It will try to stop you. It will show you visions of burning. Fill your mind with the fear of flame. You must not falter. Marcus checked his weapons and supplies, knowing that bullets would be useless against a creature made of living fire. But the familiar ritual of preparation helped calm his nerves and focus his thoughts. He had walked into danger countless times during his military service, but never anything quite like this. The descent began with a makeshift ladder that led down to the first mining level. From there, natural passages and excavated tunnels wound deeper into the earth, following veins of coal that glowed with their own internal heat. Marcus could feel the temperature rising with each step, and sweat began to pour from his body despite the early morning chill above ground. "Tell me about the binding stones," he said, as he navigated a particularly narrow passage. "They are carved from rock that has never seen sunlight, blessed with ceremonies older than memory," Morningstar replied, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Each stone must be placed at a specific point around the flame walker's resting place, and each placement must be accompanied by words that reinforce the spiritual barriers." The passages grew wider as Marcus descended, opening into natural caverns that predated any human excavation. The walls were lined with coal seams that pulsed with orange light, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy. Steam rose from cracks in the floor, carrying with it the acrid smell of burning stone. "How much farther?" Marcus asked, pausing to catch his breath. "You are close. The final chamber lies just ahead. Prepare yourself, Marcus Steele. The Flame Walker knows you approach." As if summoned by Morningstar's words, a sound echoed through the caverns, a roar that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. It was the voice of fire given form, the cry of something that existed to consume and destroy. The temperature spiked suddenly, and Marcus felt his hair singe from the superheated air. The final chamber opened before him like the mouth of hell itself. It was vast, far larger than any natural cavern had a right to be, its walls lined with coal that burned without being consumed. In the center of the space, something that hurt to look at directly writhed and pulsed with malevolent energy. The Flame Walker was not a creature in any conventional sense, but rather a convergence of fire and hunger given consciousness. It towered 20 feet high, its form constantly shifting between solid and gaseous states. Eyes like burning coals regarded Marcus with ancient malice, and when it spoke, the words came as superheated air that scorched his lungs. "Another sacrifice comes willingly to my domain," the Flame Walker hissed. "Your Apache allies burned sweetly, mortal. You will make a fine addition to my feast." Marcus forced himself to step into the chamber, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to flee. The barrier stones hung in a leather pouch at his side, and he could feel their weight like anchors dragging him toward his destiny. "Ignore its words," Morningstar commanded, her voice somehow cutting through the creature's roar. "Begin with the eastern stone. Place it in the carved depression, and speak the words I give you." Marcus moved to the indicated spot, finding a circular depression carved into the chamber floor. The stone fit perfectly, and as he placed it, Morningstar began speaking words in Apache that flowed through his mouth as if he had known them all his life. The Flame Walker shrieked in rage and pain, its form expanding as it fought against the binding. Waves of superheated air washed over Marcus, singeing his clothes and skin, but the spiritual protection provided by Morningstar's presence kept him from being consumed. "The southern stone now," she directed. Marcus moved quickly, placing the second barrier while speaking words that seemed to have physical weight. The Flame Walker's struggles intensified, and chunks of burning coal began falling from the ceiling as the creature threw itself against the spiritual constraints. "You cannot contain me forever," the Flame Walker raged. "I am older than your pathetic ceremonies, stronger than your feeble magic. When I break free, I will burn your precious territory until only ash remains. The western stone, Morningstar said calmly. Do not listen to its threats. The third placement proved more difficult. The Flamewalker had learned to anticipate Marcus's movements and began directing jets of flame at the depression sites. Marcus had to dodge and weave, using mining equipment as cover while completing the ritual. His clothes were smoking now, and blisters were forming on his exposed skin. The final stone, Morningstar urged. To the north, complete the binding. Marcus ran for the last position, the Flamewalker pursuing him with tendrils of living fire that left molten tracks in the stone floor. He dove into the depression just as a massive gout of flame passed over his head, rolling to place the final stone, while gasping out the binding words. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The 4 barrier stones blazed with cold light that seemed to drain heat from the air itself. The Flamewalker's roar of defeat echoed through the chamber as invisible chains dragged it down toward the deepest parts of the earth. Its form compressed, condensed, and finally vanished into a crack that sealed itself with molten rock. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by Marcus's labored breathing and the distant sound of cooling stone. It is done, Morningstar said, her voice filled with satisfaction and relief. The Flamewalker sleeps once more, bound by barriers that will hold for generations. You have done well, Marcus Steele. Marcus struggled to his feet, his body aching from the heat and exertion. What happens now? Now you return to the surface and begin a new life. The Apache spirits will watch over this place, ensure that the binding remains strong. But you must carry the knowledge forward, teach others who can take up the responsibility when the time comes. The journey back to the surface seemed to take forever. Marcus's burns needed attention, and his clothing was little more than charred rags. But with each step away from the sealed chamber, he felt the weight of supernatural threat lifting from his shoulders. The mining camp remained deserted when he emerged, but the Apache horses were waiting patiently near the excavation site. The painted stallion approached him, nuzzling his shoulder in what seemed like a gesture of approval and gratitude. The horses will take you home, Morningstar said. But first, there is something you must see. She directed him to a small building that had served as the mining foreman's office. Inside, Marcus found detailed maps and geological surveys that showed the location of other coal and oil deposits throughout the territory. Many were marked with symbols that made his eyes water, notations that suggested the mining company had been aware of more than just mineral wealth. They knew, Marcus breathed, understanding dawning. They knew what they were awakening. The hunger for profit makes men blind to consequence, Morningstar replied. But now the immediate threat is contained. The other sites can wait, be approached with proper caution and preparation. Marcus gathered the maps and documents, knowing they would be crucial for preventing future disasters. The mining company might be gone, their workers consumed by the Flamewalker's initial awakening, but others would come. They always did, drawn by the promise of wealth and heedless of the cost. The ride back to his ranch passed in contemplative silence. The Apache horses moved with sure steps through the scorched landscape, following paths that avoided the worst of the burn damage. Marcus found himself thinking about the sacrifice Morningstar and her people had made, giving their lives to protect a territory that had never shown them kindness or respect. When they reached his homestead, the horses gathered in his barn as if by long agreement. Marcus unsaddled and tended to them, knowing somehow that they would be staying. They were his responsibility now, living reminders of the Apache who had died to protect the frontier. That evening, as he sat on his porch, treating his burns with supplies from his medical kit, Marcus could hear voices carried on the desert wind. Not words exactly, but something that spoke directly to his spirit. The Apache were still watching, still protecting, still maintaining their vigil over the sealed places where ancient hungers slept. "Will I see you again?" he asked the empty air. "When the need is great, we will come," Morningstar replied, her voice already growing faint.
"Until then, remember what you have learned. The frontier holds many secrets, Marcus Steele. Some are treasures to be claimed, but others are dangers to be contained. Learn the difference, and teach it to those who come after." The voice faded, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. But for the first time in years, He felt genuinely hopeful about the future.
The Flame Walker was bound, the territory was safe, and he had found a purpose that went beyond mere survival. In the days that followed, Marcus began preparing for the challenges ahead. He studied the mining company's documents, learning to recognize the signs that marked supernatural threats. He practiced the Apache words Morning Star had taught him, committing them to memory against future need. And he began reaching out to other settlers, carefully planting seeds of caution about disturbing certain geological formations. The work was subtle, but crucial. Most frontier folk would not believe stories about creatures of living flame, but they could be convinced to avoid areas that seemed unlucky or dangerous. Marcus developed a reputation as someone who knew the land, whose advice about mining claims and settlement sites was worth heeding. 3 months later, when another mining company arrived to investigate the abandoned coal operation, Marcus was ready for them. He met with their surveyor, a practical man named Johnson, who was focused on profit margins and extraction efficiency. "I wouldn't recommend working those particular seams," Marcus said, pointing to areas marked on the mining maps. "The previous operation ran into some serious problems. Gas pockets, unstable geology, that sort of thing." Johnson studied the geological surveys with professional interest. "These readings do show some unusual thermal activity. Could be dangerous for the workers. Probably better to focus on the northern deposits," Marcus suggested. "Cleaner coal, easier extraction, less risk of cave-ins or explosions." It was not the complete truth, but it was enough. The new mining company shifted their focus to safer areas that Marcus had carefully vetted for supernatural activity. The sealed chamber where the Flamewalker slept remained undisturbed, protected by ignorance as much as by spiritual barriers. As winter approached, Marcus found himself thinking more and more about the Apache horses that had become permanent residents of his barn. They were magnificent animals, intelligent and responsive, but they served as constant reminders of the price that had been paid for the territory's safety. 7 lives sacrificed to contain a single supernatural threat. How many other sealed sites existed throughout the frontier? How many other ancient hungers waited in the deep places, held back only by ceremonies and barriers that required constant maintenance? The questions kept Marcus awake at night, staring at the ceiling while planning for challenges he could barely imagine. The answer came on the first night of the new year, when he woke to find Morning Star's spirit standing at the foot of his bed. She appeared translucent in the moonlight, her form wavering like heat shimmer, but her voice was as clear as ever. "The time has come for you to understand the full scope of your responsibility," she said. "There are others like you, scattered across the frontier. White settlers who have been chosen by necessity to guard the sealed places. You must find them, share knowledge, build a network of protection that can endure beyond any single lifetime." Marcus sat up in bed, instantly alert. "How many others?" 7. To match the 7 who died in the binding ritual. Each guards a different type of threat. Each has learned different aspects of the ancient knowledge. Together, you represent the territory's best hope for lasting safety. She gestured toward the window, where Marcus could see the Apache horses standing in his corral. Their eyes seemed to glow in the darkness, and he realized they were not just animals, but spiritual guides, capable of leading him to the other guardians when the time was right. "Your education begins tomorrow," Morning Star continued. "The horses will show you the way to the first guardian, a woman who binds earth spirits near the Colorado border. From her you will learn techniques that complement what you already know." Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, but this time it was tempered by hope. He would not be facing the supernatural threats alone. There were others who shared his burden, others who understood the delicate balance between progress and preservation that kept the frontier safe. "I'm ready," he said simply. Morning Star smiled, her form beginning to fade as dawn approached. "The Apache chose well when they gave their lives to save yours, Marcus Steele. The spirits see strength in you, wisdom earned through hardship, and most importantly, the courage to do what must be done, regardless of personal cost." As her presence vanished, Marcus rose and began preparing for the journey ahead. The other guardians were waiting, scattered across the vast frontier like hidden sentinels. Finding them would take months, maybe years, but the network they would build together would protect the territory for generations to come. He saddled the painted stallion, the most intelligent of the Apache horses, and loaded his saddlebags with supplies for an extended journey. The other horses watched him with knowing eyes, understanding that their role as guides was about to begin. As Marcus rode out into the pre-dawn darkness, following trails that existed more in the spiritual realm than the physical world, he thought about the strange path that had brought him to this moment. A fire that burned in perfect patterns, horses without riders, voices that spoke from empty air, all impossible things that had become the foundation of his new reality. The frontier was vast and full of secrets, some wonderful and some terrible. But now Marcus knew that it was also protected, watched over by an invisible network of guardians who stood ready to face whatever ancient hungers might stir in the deep places of the earth. The painted stallion carried him toward his destiny, following paths marked by signs that only spirits could read, toward a meeting with others who shared his sacred responsibility. Behind them, the sealed chamber where the flame walker slept remained quiet and still, its supernatural prisoner bound by sacrifice and protected by vigilance. In the growing light of dawn, the frontier stretched endlessly in all directions, a land of infinite possibility and carefully hidden danger. And somewhere in that vastness, 6 other guardians waited to join their knowledge with his, to build something that would endure long after they were gone. The Apache spirits sang softly on the morning wind, their voices carrying prayers of protection and songs of hope across the awakening landscape. The fire had ended, the silence was broken, and the real work of guardianship was about to begin.